Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one we are taking a look at tonight's new card, the Living Tribunal. So last card for the Guardians of the Galaxy season. This is one I think some people are pretty excited for, though admittedly probably not as excited as some more recent card releases such as the High Evolutionary or even Iron Lad. So let's talk a little bit about this card and then get into some day one decks for it. Before we dive on into the video, do want to mention the article where you can grab all the decks we're going to be going over from Safety Blade. He put a lot of work into getting these together, and I really like some of the brews he came up with. So if you want to grab the decks or just see a little bit more in-depth write-up on some of the decks, check out the link in the description below. So the Living Tribunal is a 6 cost, 6 power. When he was data mined, he was actually 4 power, but they did give him some additional power, as well as the ongoing keyword. So previously, this was just kind of like Dracula text. Now there's an actual ongoing ability strapped onto it, so maybe that can be useful for things like Spectrum, we'll see, but it also does make him open to being countered if you do slam him out early on during the game by things like Enchantress or Rogue. So ongoing, split your total power evenly among all locations. This is definitely a very neat ability, and there is a fairly cool animation for it too, but it's not necessarily the strongest ability. I think you are going to have to jump through quite a few hoops, and the thing with Marvel Snap is it's a game about winning 2 lanes. You don't really care about that 3rd lane. So in order to win all 3 lanes with this card, you have to have a really absurd amount of power, which is often more than you would need to just win 2 lanes on your own. So for that reason, I do think this card isn't necessarily the strongest release we've had. I think it is a pretty mediocre card and kind of hard to make work, but it is going to do some really flashy things when it does work. So it feels very much kind of like a Timmy card if you're really into going for a super cool combo, but you know that combo is not going to work all of the time. This is probably a card for you. This is one of those cards that I don't see being very consistent at helping to win the game, and a lot of times you'll be better off without it, but when it does work, it'll be doing some really cool and flashy stuff. So definitely a high roller card. For that reason, I think you should probably be saving your tokens on this one, unless you are just a player who really likes those high rolly type of decks, like Negative, like Hela, and we're going to look at some decks for those cards that include Tribunal. But if that's not really your cup of tea, Tribunal just might not be the card for you. It's also worth mentioning that they have confirmed that 2 cards are going to be dropping into Series 4 upon release in June. So not only is this maybe not worth 6,000 tokens for 1 card, but if you are interested in some of the Spider-Verse cards that are coming in the upcoming weeks, you might be better off saving for those, because you could get 2 cards for effectively the same price as the Living Tribunal. So yeah, this is going to be a pass from me, unless you are kind of sitting on a very large stockpile of tokens, or maybe you're not as interested in the cards that are coming out in June. Maybe you could consider this, but I think this is one, at the very least, you'll want to wait and see what people do with it a bit before you commit such a large amount of your resources on a card that isn't really expected to make a big shift in terms of building new decks or affecting the metagame. First deck we have here is a Negative Surfer build. So negative decks obviously are going to be one of the decks that can output a really absurd amount of power in 1 lane, and then we can use Tribunal to hopefully get the benefits of spreading that to other lanes. The other nice thing about negative decks is some of the best flips we can get in the deck are on 0 power cards. So they will cost 0 after we draw them. Things like Iron Man, Mystique, and Ironheart are all things we can play once they are negative flipped with Living Tribunal on the final turn. So that's definitely a high point for this. The other thing about this version is we are just a Negative Surfer deck, so you don't have to be all in on the Living Tribunal, which I'm guessing is going to be probably the better way to play this card. I think you're going to be better off going with the deck that has its own game plan, but can also leverage Living Tribunal as a bit of surprise at the end of the game, but you're not necessarily going for that Living Tribunal play most of your games. It's just kind of there as a surprise factor that can sometimes steal you some cubes in a game you might not otherwise win. This is particularly relevant against decks like Lane Control, which have been getting more popular recently. Lane Control tries to lock down 2 lanes and not allow you to play cards into them, or the high Evo versions where they're locking down 1 lane and then playing a big Hulk. So if we can put a ton of power in 1 lane and then surprise them in the lockdown lane via Living Tribunal, this deck might have some surprise cube equity. If you want a more all-in combo-focused version of Mr. Negative, we have a Jane Negative build, so these ones are always really cool. Probably less consistent than the Surfer ones, but let's be honest, Negative has never been the most consistent archetype to begin with. And this version, we do some powerful things with 0-cost cards and use Jane to actually draw these 0-cost cards, while also including Black Panther because of the synergy with things like Wong and Zola, and the fact that getting this stuff out when it's negative flipped allows us to take advantage of the Living Tribunal a lot of the time, since a lot of these powerful cards will cost 0. So we could use a Zola and an Iron Man together, spread those out, or Zoling a Null here is always a pretty cool line as well. We can do the Black Panther combo without any of the negative shenanigans, so decent options here if you're more into a more combo-focused version of the archetype. If you want a bit more of an experimental brew on the Jane Negative stuff, this is one that Safety's been particularly fond of and is going to be trying Living Tribunal in. But this uses things like Iron Lad for additional high rolls. We have Darkhawk just because it's another really good flip and we can draw it with Jane. And Crystal getting some surprise use here, as drawing cards is a particularly nice thing to do once you've gotten your Mr. Negative proc off. Definitely a more all-in version of a combo deck, but it's going to put out a pretty funny amount of power at the times you're going to get it to go off. Another option that we can consider here is a Lockjaw Thanos deck, so having Tribunal as another thing that can pop out of the Lockjaw so we don't necessarily have to pay its expensive cost to get it into play. This is using the High Evolutionary as well, because we get another really big thing that can pop out of the jaw in Hulk, and it makes our Wasp a bit better, which we're going to naturally be chucking away into the Lockjaw whenever we can. Definitely an interesting idea here, as the Lockjaw decks often put up a really absurd amount of power in 1 lane, but it's the other lane you have to worry about closing out. And with this strategy, we can actually fight for all 3 lanes with that 1 lane of really high power, so it seems like a natural fit for the Living Tribunal. Next up, we have some Hela experiments. Hela is another archetype where it's kind of a feast or famine combo deck, but we do get the benefit of Living Tribunal not having to be paid for if we're just bringing it back from being discarded. Hela, I think, is the archetype that probably benefits the most from this, as Hela has always been able to put out a pretty absurd amount of power when it goes off. However, the big downside of Hela is that you can't predict where your cards are going, and so sometimes it screws you over, putting too much big power in 1 lane that you didn't really need to win. So Living Tribunal helps equalize that, because it takes that crazy amount of power we're outputting and splits it evenly across all 3 lanes. So this is a new take on Hela. I really like what Safety's done here, making use of the newly buffed Invisible Woman. You can hide things like your Ebony Maw and your Atuma behind Invisible Woman, and their negative effects won't be relevant as long as she is in play. So that's really nice. 410, really good. 1-7, really good. Also lets us hide our MODOK, so we don't have to worry about discarding Hela before we have the final turn of the game, to where we can actually get all these big things into play. So again, a very kind of all-in version, but the nice thing about this is, even if you don't get to go in on the Hela plan, if you're able to do the Ebony Maw, the Atuma behind the Invisible Woman, that's a ton of power. That's 20 power among 3 cards, and then we can use one of our other big cards, like Giganto, like Infinite, like Magneto, to hopefully close out another lane if we didn't get the tools we needed to assemble Hela. That game. You could also consider High Evolutionary in this deck too, as it gives us another really big thing to bring back with the Hela in Hulk. This is a deck that does float a fair amount of the time, thus the Sunspot inclusion. So Hulk seems like a natural fit as another big thing that we can split among star power with the Living Tribunal. Then we have a lane control style deck with the Tribunal, and the idea with this one is, so the Tribunal is a bit of a bonus plan here, where if we lock down a lane and don't end up winning it, we can use the Tribunal to split our power to get some more additional power into that locked lane to hopefully close out the game. We have the trifecta of lane lock here with things like Storm, Spider-Man, and Professor X, and we're also making use of cards that are generally higher statted for their cost, such as things like Maximus, Crossbones, and Mr. Fantastic's effect, obviously working well with the nature of this lane lock strategy. Jeff, also an MVP in helping us out when we are losing a lockdown lane. He can occasionally take opponents by surprise, which is always nice. Luke Cage is a bit of anti-high evo tech. Armor seems to be getting more valuable again, as people are starting to run Killmonger to counter all the sunspots and nebulas going around, as well as Kitty Pryde, so it doesn't hurt to be a little extra safe there. But this is definitely more of a deck that is using Tribunal as a kind of backup surprise rather than the main way to win a game, but maybe that is the right application for it in some senses. Then we have a high evo take on the lockdown build, so using a lot of the high evolutionary cards here if you're into that. And since the high evo does put out a large amount of power, having the Tribunal to do the same thing as the other deck, where if we are losing in our locked lanes and we want to take the opponent by surprise, maybe they're expecting us just to slam the big Hulk, but instead we divide our power so we can win 2 other lanes they're not expecting us to focus on. Definitely gives you an interesting game plan to pivot to if the initial plan of lane locking isn't working out that game. The last 2 decks we're going to look at here are fully focused combo decks. I don't think that going all in on your combo is going to be the way to go with this card in terms of consistent performance, but if you don't mind a lack of that in place of getting a really crazy finishing moment, maybe these decks are for you. So this first one here, we have a bit of a ramp style deck, very heavy on the curve, but we have a lot of powerful cards here. We have the Black Panther Zola combo, we have Iron Man Onslaught, which can combo well with the Tribunal. The critical mass of high cost cards here makes Iron Lad really good because there are a lot of powerful effects we can copy. Electro helps us get these cards out earlier ahead of curve, as does Wave, and Wave provides some valuable tech against the Kitty Pryde and Sarah decks. Jubilee allows for some nice high rolls, as there are a lot of good targets to hit, and if we get Odin, we end up getting a 2-for-1 out of her. So this one definitely more all in on doing combo stuff, but seems like a reasonable direction to go, as Tribunal does seem to be a card that kind of asks for some kind of powerful combo to make the best use of its effect. And then last but not least, we have a ongoing combo focused list. So the idea with this one is we are using all the powerful ongoing cards to output as much power as we can, getting some benefits from Onslaught here too, so doubling up on those powerful effects and then splitting them evenly at the end of the game with Tribunal to hopefully win every lane. We do have some protection here with things like Invisible Woman and Cosmo to prevent any pesky enchantresses that might be going around trying to ruin our fun. Electro enables us to cheat out some of the more powerful ongoing cards more easily. Since this is a more mid to high curve deck, we can usually empty our hand of the cheap 1-drops and then get to ramp out into things like Iron Man or Claw, and then get to play Tribunal into Onslaught, or the other way around, depending on how you want to do it, all while doing it in a way where it should be pretty hard for the opponent to interact with. Omega Red finally getting some spotlight here. Seems like a very decent card if we're going to double up on its effect, and Living Tribunal gives us a chance at winning all the lanes, so definitely seems like it is a powerful effect for this style of deck, especially if you can double up on it. So I think the on reveal one is probably going to be the stronger one, because it just has a more solid core to it, being very similar to the ramp deck. But if ongoing is really your theme and you want to do some combo stuff with it, this is probably the direction I would try. So there we have it, a bunch of different really fun combo oriented decks for the Living Tribunal. I'm excited to see what people do with this card when it releases later tonight. I'm probably going to be picking this one up, despite not being initially super excited for it, because I do think it's just going to make for some very amusing highlight moments, and so that makes it worth it to me, even though it might not be the best card around, and certainly not the best card releasing this month. But yeah, if you want any of the decks, definitely suggest checking out the article from Safety and the link in the description below. You can import all the decks there and find a little bit more reasoning behind the decisions and game plan of each of the decks. So check that out, link in the description below. But that is going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and stay tuned here on Marvel Snap Zone for all your Marvel Snap focused content. I'm Zombies, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.